A very good morning, everybody, and once again, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. Um, we've already, in the last chat, we've already, heard about how urgent law reform is, and I think there's nobody who can deny that our laws and our policies are not drafted keeping the queer community in mind. They are binary in nature, they are grounded in a heteronormative understanding of the world. So I think we all can agree that urgent reform is needed to our policy and legal frameworks. But what we want to do with this panel today is we want to talk about with this panel we're bringing together queer voices from civil society to reflect on what the government and what the state needs to do to make sure that they respond meaningfully to the lives that people from the community lead. And what we want to do also is we want to discuss how we need to bridge the gaps between the promises of the law and address the actual conditions that queer trans persons face in their homes, on the streets, and in interacting with various public systems. So, without further ado, I now want to introduce our panelists. Our first speaker is Ayushmaan, also known by their stage name Lush Monsoon. They are one of India's leading drag performers and a human rights lawyer also. They were recently featured in the documentary series Rainbow Rishta. Ayushman graduated from the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, in 2015. And they currently also lead the programs at Housing and Land Rights Network, a non-profit organization that facilitates housing rights for the most marginalized groups in India. Our second speaker is Koyel Ghosh. Koyel is a gender non-conforming, non-binary, queer feminist activist. They are the managing trustee of Sappho for Equality and an ex-educator who has continued to impart knowledge and love to young minds for over half a decade. Their vision is to collectively create a gender just society where no one is excluded on the basis of their gender identity or sexual orientation.
We also have Dr. Soham Basu. Soham identifies as a genderqueer person associated with queer trans and feminist grassroots movements in West Bengal for more than a decade. Currently, they are a part of a queer trans organization called Marsha Against Discrimination and a disability rights organization called Sanchara Road. We have Dr. Souradipta Chandra. Dr. Souradipta is the head of internal medicine and travel medicine at Helvetia Medical Center in New Delhi, which is one of the few queer-friendly clinics in the country. With 20 years of experience, Dr. Chandra is one of the leading HIV specialists in the country and is also the chief medical advisor to the Lalit Group and the KSF Foundation. Dr. Chandra is also the medical advisor to multiple embassies and organizations, including the delegation of the European Union to India. We welcome all the panelists for joining us on this Saturday morning. Now, before we begin, I'll just introduce us to some housekeeping rules. We'll have 5 minutes of opening remarks from all of our panelists, followed by a discussion of around 20 to 25 minutes, after which we hope to have some audience interaction for around 10 minutes. Let's just begin the discussion. My first question is to you, Koel. So the queer community for the longest time has been asking to shift the focus on chosen families and non-traditional family structures. And in terms of reform, that would also require delinking certain socioeconomic rights from marriage, like the ability to make medical decisions or healthcare decisions on behalf of your partner or your chosen family, or availing certain tax benefits which are otherwise available only to married heterosexual couples. So, according to you, what can the state do in apart from just the recognition of a chosen family or an atypical family structure? What can the state do to move away from this grave focus on the linkage or the linkage of socioeconomic rights to marriage?
Thank you for the question. I think what is important to understand here is to also understand natal family violence and to understand that only marriage is not going to save us, protect us from the kind of humiliation, indignity, and violence that we face on an everyday basis. And I speak from lived experience. I speak for the community which we work with and work for. And when you do not recognize a human being as a person and you take the personhood away from them, that's when you have to depend on another relation to define their existence. So in marriage also, when we're saying that only if we recognize same-sex marriage or civil unionship, not everybody in the queer trans community, let's be honest, have partners or lovers or friends who they can, who they completely depend on. So there are also chosen families, there are also friendships that you forge, bondings that you make, comradeships that you develop, and those need recognition. Those need recognition because, for example, if I am in a hospital and my decisions have to be made whether I will be put off the ventilator or the ventilator will be continued, I would not want my chosen, like my natal family, people who have disowned me and people like me to come take that decision on my behalf, because they are not the ones who stood by me in my moments of depression, in my moments of loneliness, in my moments of isolation. It is my chosen family. These are people who stood by me, understood me, and not tried to fix me. Fix us. Fix people like us. They are the ones who should have the right to decide whether I need to be put off that ventilator or whether I need to be kept on. They are the ones who need to decide and take those decisions on my behalf. And not just for me, this is for all the people in the community who have faced extreme forms of natal family violence. We know individuals who've come to us during the COVID times who faced such starvation, humiliation, violence, physical violence. They've been beaten up black and blue. They had to endure coercive marriage and forceful rape by their own family members. And these are the realities that we are dealing with. As queer people, as trans people who are assigned female at birth, life is a little more difficult. Not just because of your gender identity or your sexual orientation, also because you have been assigned at birth. What are your genitalias? What is it that people look at you as? When we were facing violence because of the cafe incident that happened, many of you know about this. It happened in Kolkata where 5 of us were being mob lynched, and the things that they were doing to us was groping, was trying to figure out what is inside my shirt. And they were doing this and they could do it because we said that, what you're saying is wrong. You cannot violate my staff, you cannot do this. And they said, oh, so you're a trans person, let me check. So when FIR was being filed, we had to file it by our dead names, by names we did not want to be recognized as. We had to go, a trans man had to say, okay, my name is so and so, my dead name is so and so, I am a woman. And he had to shave off his beard because he was post-op and he was, he's under HRT practices, but he had to shave his beard to go to the court and say, this happened to me and I am assigned female at birth, and that is why they were groping me. That is why they were picking and thrusting and pulling and pushing and kicking me. So you have to constantly keep proving to the world that, okay, this is who I identify as, but this is the violence that happened to me. And this violence is not a singular incident that happened to us, and that is why I'm talking from a position of anger. This is something that happens to every queer and trans person, irrespective of what caste identity, what class identity, which religious identity they belong to. And it happens all the more when you have those intersections of, identities. It happens when we are traveling in a bus. It happens in a workplace where you are told to tone it down. How much do you tone it down? Why do you have to tone it down? Why do you have to live an inauthentic life for the rest of your life, trying to prove to the world that I am enough, I'm capable, see me, feel me, accept me? So I think it is important and it is imperative that not just tax benefits. I'm not just talking about tax benefits. I'm not just talking about recognition in provident fund, in gratuity. If I want this much of money, I would want my chosen family to have rights over that money. If that is my basic, if I'm a tax paying citizen of this country, then I have the right to choose who's going to get it after me. And this cannot be, automatically given to a family that has denied our life, our authenticity, our realities. There needs to be recognition, because when we go to a queer trans person's school or college where they are being subjected to bullying, the first question is asked is, who are you and why have you come here? When somebody is being put into the hospital because their family have beaten them so much that they need to be hospitalized, or somebody has ideated suicide, has tried to commit suicide, and you go and try and tell them, please take this, please wash away because this person has drank phenyl, and they say, but why are we going to take them? Why are we going to admit them? Call their parents. How are we going to call their parents? How are we going to? Because this person is losing out on precious time, and here you are trying to find relationships. Which is the main reason why this person has committed or tried to commit suicide. And then what are you saying? It is not just in terms of tax exemptions or in terms of gratuities or in terms of provident funds. It is also in terms of simple things. Like if you make a will of whatever you have, whatever little you have, it can easily be challenged by the natal family saying, no, I've lived with this person for 15 years, but now you have to leave that home and go live somewhere else. The reason being, you no longer co-own that property, because it's in one person's name, and the other person has to now walk away and give up on the house that they've built together, on friendships, on families. Families are not just tied by blood. It cannot be. Families that continue to humiliate, degrade, and denigrate our humanity cannot be our families. When I was growing up, I kept thinking that things will change. I'm 35 now, and I know it's not. And I know there are people sitting here who are much older to me, and they also have, but consultations like this give me hope. They give us hope that, yeah, something is happening. Some things are bound to happen. Some changes will happen in the due course of time, so that people after us, generations after us, do not have to endure the same kind of violation that we had to go through. That they will have better lives, better livabilities, better dignity than we've had to endure. And that's the hope that keeps us alive and keeps us, and that makes us continue to do what we do, with that conviction that things will change. I don't know what will it mean if people accept queer relationships, chosen families, chosen kinships. But I know for a fact that a lot of us, the quality of our lives will improve. You know, our situations, our socioeconomic situations might not change. But when you go to a tenancy, like a place where you rent a house, there are so many times that people say within 6 months, after having an agreement for 11 months, one has to just leave because the house owner has decided that these two people, or these three people, or these four people, do not deserve to be in a community which is respectable. Then what are you saying? That people like us should not have houses, should not have places where we should belong. And where are we going to go? In shelter homes? Shelter homes where a trans person is included but their partner isn't. Garima Grace have said that only trans individuals who identify as minority trans people have rights to stay in a Garima Grave for 1 year. What about their partners who faced equal forms of violence? On queer women, on queer men, who faced equal forms of violence, where are they going to go? They have been separated by natal family, ran away from their homes, and again separated in shelter homes. So no, shelter home is not going to be our solutions. There has to be housing rights. Cooperative housing rights need to be amended to talk about queer trans people within the ambit of who should get. What is this? There's this provision I was reading about immoral behavior. How do you categorize what is immoral behavior? Who decides what is moral and what is immoral? And on whose standards are this immorality and morality decided? Not everybody has the people who are forcefully migrated from the villages, from the areas which are not city or urban centric to the cities to find houses. It is extremely difficult. And then when you are also asked to leave from that house and move to the other, and then to the other, and then to the other, your cats, your dogs, everything is moving with you constantly. This constant homelessness that you're enduring. This never in the report that Namrata was mentioning about Apno Ka Bahut Lagta Hai, 32 people said about how, and these are queer, trans, AFAB individuals who said they were subjected to extreme forms of conversion therapy. Even today, and I can tell it and I can vouch for it, in West Bengal, there are several rehabilitation centers that are admitting queer trans people and saying they need to be cured of their queerness and transness, but they're saying this is Nesha Mukti Kendra. Basically, that is the kind of excuses that are giving, and people are there. We had somebody who came to us for a gender dysphoria certificate, and he was in a rehabilitation center for 2 years. This boy could not look into people's eyes. This trans man had lost out on that little iota of confidence that he had. For him, his chosen family are his friends. And the recognition that yes, these are people who has the right to take decisions on your behalf is intrinsic to queer trans lives. It is intrinsic for us to live a life of dignity. It is intrinsic to acknowledge and recognize that relationships cannot be bound only by marriage, only by blood ties. There are some things and many things beyond that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for summing up some of the challenges and the experiences that so many people in the community go through so succinctly and also so evocatively, Koyal. I'm pretty sure that resonated with a lot of people in this room itself, and for people with whom maybe it did not resonate that much, who are not aware of these challenges, I'm pretty sure that it's given much food for thought. I want to come to you next, Ayushman. One of the things that Koyal mentioned in their when they were talking was also, how when it comes to various socio-economic rights, those still remain a major challenge for people from the community. And access to all kinds of goods and services, be it financial services, be it housing, be it social welfare generally, it's a very urgent and very unevenly addressed form of discrimination against people from the community. Now, one of the remedies that's often put forward is an anti discrimination law. And people in the previous panel, also, our team in the previous panel, did speak about it. But what I also want to ask you is that beyond an anti discrimination law, what are some other legal and policy changes that need to be made to ensure that this access ends up becoming more meaningful in practice? And let's take the example of housing, deriving from your work itself. And you've done a lot of work with transgender persons, particularly, who often live in very unsecured living conditions in informal settlements. What sort of changes do you see happening there? What are some major systemic pressing barriers? And what kind of changes do you think need to be made, especially to address some structural inequities based on caste, class, and gender? So I would invite you to one.
Hello. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Vidhi team and KSF for organizing this and also the process over the last few months. We were very happy as part of Housing and Land Rights Network to contribute to this submission. I was also part of the initial querying the law sessions which used to happen at the Vidhi office. I've been there as a younger queer. Trying to find my footing in the city, and it was really like that atmosphere that time. Also, we had so many discussions and debates in the Vidhi office. I remember with Namrita as well. So it was really great, but very happy with this document that has come forth, which will be released, I'm sure, shortly. So to answer your question and to take from Koen's point as well, the first thing that we need to understand and which I want to really reiterate is that housing is a human right. And that is something which is often ignored in any sort of policy level discussions. Even like government officials sometimes are not very aware of this, because one reason is that we don't have a legislative backing for the right to housing. It's largely being done through judicial pronouncements. So whether it's the Olga Dallas judgment or the Sudama Singh or the Ajay Makan, these judgments are what lay down what the right to housing really enshrines, what it means, what does adequate housing really mean. Internationally, there's a lot of work done on this issue, and we have a lot of material and normative content there which lays out exactly what housing rights are and what constitutes a violation of those housing rights. But in India, we don't have a law which like specifically recognizes the right to housing. And that is where the first challenge begins. So we have to begin with understanding that when we talk about the dignity of queer persons, we need to understand that housing forms a very big part of it, because housing is what ensures that safety, security, and dignity for a lot of trans persons and for queer people. House, a safe space and a house is where you understand your gender identity, you come to terms with it, and it gives you the chance to come into yourself. And that's why a house is such an important thing, apart from like every other aspect as well, of course. So we'd like to start with that. And then when we think of challenges related to housing for queer persons, the first thing that we all think of is the rental housing discrimination, which is absolutely an important thing, which we face, especially in cities. We have all faced it. I'm a drag performer, and I cannot I think multiple times when I have to call my very femme, drag queen friends to my house, because I'm very curious, like what will my landlord think? Like what will they say? And I don't want to be evicted again and again, even though I'm a lawyer. First of all, once they hear you're a lawyer, that itself becomes a prejudice. So I have to hide that, and then you have to hide the fact that okay, you're a drag performer, or that you can't have your friends over who maybe like dress differently or present themselves differently. My queer friends, like other drag performers, are facing this challenge like every day. Like we are in the middle of a show, and one of our drag performers is actually has got an eviction notice, and they have to find something else by this week, because just because their neighbors saw them coming back home in drag. And the importance of safe space is like so crucial. Like, this is a safe space for us. We talked about how what discrimination people face at their workplace. But when I first came to the Lalit, the first person that I saw was Mahi. She's somewhere out there, and seeing a trans person or a queer person out there who is there to help you, just suddenly like everything vanished from my mind. Like I felt so comfortable, and that's what is important and crucial, and that has just grown over time. But this is just one example of that, and this is how it needs to be everywhere else as well. But coming back to the question of like housing, so when we think of an anti-discrimination law, yes, it is an important thing, because it does address a very crucial question of discrimination. How we go about it is again something that we have to see. It needs to have a strong grievance redressal mechanism, because there are plenty of laws and there are plenty of provisions, there are plenty of schemes as well. At HLRN, we released this year a report on access to housing for trans persons. And in that, we studied the state provisions as well. And there are many states which have very interesting provisions to include trans persons and queer persons within the housing schemes. But what we don't see is how does it materialize in actual implementation, and that's where the challenge happens. The other thing to to note is that in India we already face such a large housing shortage. There are over 65 million people who live in informal settlements in India, and like at least 80 to 20 million housing units are still needed in India. So there are queer people who live in these informal settlements as well. So our idea was to understand within the different categories of people that we exist, because queer persons are not like a monolith. Okay, so we face so many different kinds of discrimination based on our access of caste, income, and multiple other things, religion, etc. So through our report, we wanted to understand what is the access to housing for these sections as well. So we met several homeless persons in Delhi, some of them who live in Yamuna Pushta, and who have been like forced to like migrate from place to place. So the challenge which like everybody else faces, which is the forced evictions, not just from private property owners, but also from the government itself. When the state evicts people out of their houses without like providing them alternative housing or some sort of rehabilitation, trans persons are affected by that as well because they are also homeless. And in many of these cases, of course, trans persons are then left out of the rehabilitation scheme because they don't have documents, they don't have IDs which can prove that they have been living in that site for a certain number of years, which the policy requires. Similarly, for people living in informal settlements, it was a surprise to us as well that when we found out that there are bastis in Delhi where trans persons also live with the larger community. And the discrimination that they face there is not from their immediate neighbors, but then the state becomes the problem there. Recently, a huge demolition happened in Tughlakabad, like last year, and there were trans people who lived in chugis there in informal settlements, and they did not know where they would go because to find a place in the city is difficult enough, and to find like harmony with your neighbors is difficult enough. But then for the state then to come and like put the threat of eviction on you, that becomes even more challenging. So those are issues that we also have to look into it. You know, when we can't like, of course, queer people have their distinct issues which we need to address, but also the larger issues which people of a certain income, class, gender, caste face. That is also something which queer persons face, and it's even compounded by their gender and sexual identity. Um, there are a lot of schemes. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is there, and it does talk about prioritizing transgender persons. But then again, to access it, it's a huge challenge. We met some people, we interviewed some people in Allahabad where our fellow is based, and they have got the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana housing. But then again, who does the house go to after after they're not there? What about the laws of inheritance? A lot of the families that we spoke to live in the Guru Chela household system, and the gurus they wanted to leave their houses to the their chelas, but how does that become possible? How does the law take into account all these non-normative families, which Namrata also spoke about? Like, how do we recognize the chosen family system? And for any kind of marriage equality or relationship to be possible in the first place, you need housing, you need spaces for that. With our work with the homeless communities in Delhi, we've like discovered how in the homeless shelters in Delhi, which are divided into like okay, men's shelter, family shelter, and there like even if you're in a marriage, in a heteronormative marriage, the woman is forced to stay in look one shelter, the man is forced to stay outside. So there, the people have told us how difficult it is to have a family in the first place. And then when you're queer and all these challenges come up, it just makes it even more complicated. So uh, the housing schemes and laws have to acknowledge these lived realities of people to be able to like make some meaningful policy which actually includes and leads to access to housing for people. In the housing discourse, we speak of a continuum of housing options. It starts with emergency housing like shelters, goes to short stay homes, to rental housing, and to self owned housing. So we have to pay attention to all these different types of housing options. The Garima Gray is an example of a emergency housing, but it's essentially a short stay home, you can call it, because while there are other schemes in all across the country, like for an example in Delhi, we have the Delhi Urban Shelter Improvement Board, which runs over 191 shelters in Delhi for homeless persons. And these shelters are there for everyone, but of course, trans persons cannot access it at all, or any kind of queer person, because there is discrimination from the people who run the shelters. The shelter caretakers will also try to like dissuade you from using it because there is fear of violence from other people living there. So that is a challenge. And then we have the Garima Grace scheme, and there are only 18 Garima Grace schemes in the entire country. Uh, the last census estimated the population of trans persons to be around 500,000, right? And that was obviously like criticized for being very underrepresented. So you can understand, like, for a huge queer population, like having 8 Garima how is that enough at all? And within the Garima people spoke to us about how it's not possible to rebuild your life in 1 year. Somebody who's escaped their family, their house, and has come to the city to suddenly, like, find jobs and opportunities, for them to, like, suddenly become, like, fully rehabilitated in 1 year is just impossible. But that's the limit that the policy sets, so people have to, like, agree to that. You require a transgender card in practice, in not in practice but in principle, to use these facilities. But a lot of people don't even know how to get a transgender card made from. Of course, like, because of the people that run the shelter, for example, in Delhi, I know Rudrani and the Mitra Trust who runs the shelter. Sometimes you do adapt these rules according to, to suit the needs of the community, but at the same time the law needs to be very clear. You can't use the shelter if you are engaged in begging or sex work, and these are some of the, livelihood things that we need to let the people have to, there's no option but to, like, they have to go for these things, because that is the only option available for them. But still, so that then that leads to, again, criminalization of people who are part of these livelihood sources. Last year we heard that, somebody from the Garimagra, during the G20 celebrations when it was being organized, they were just lifted from the traffic lights where they used to, do their, like, begging and whatever the traditional uh, means of livelihood are. So that is where the challenge begins. You criminalizing a whole livelihood option in itself, and that's a problem. And you can't allow people to then access those, the shelter, if they are engaging in those. So then, what is the livelihood option that is available to them? It's either beauty course, or again the nail technician, and all these gendered forms of, like, employment opportunities, which sometimes people do, like, want to do that, but that should not be the only option that's there. So these are the challenges which are there in the Garimagri as well. It's not enough. There needs to be a much more robust system. There needs to be a strong anti-discrimination law which lays down exactly as Namrata pointed out, like what exactly would discrimination entail, and there needs to be, like, proper mechanisms that can actually take note of these, and do something about it, rather than just leave it to as a legal document in itself. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to start with, and we definitely need to think about, like, housing and socioeconomic rights. Absolutely, there needs to be much more focus on it, because this has been such an ignored subject. I feel a large part of the queer debate becomes about marriage. It becomes about, like, other things, other civil political rights. But what makes that possible is the socioeconomic rights in the first place, and that is something that we definitely need to think about.
Thank you, Ayushmaan. They say that there's three needs: roti, kapra, or makan, and most of us are not even looking for a makan, we're just looking for a roof on our head. On the topic of discrimination, Dr. Chandra, healthcare and access to healthcare is another area that sees a lot of discrimination on ground. And we have hard laws like the HIV/AIDS Act for the prohibition of discrimination against people living with HIV. But it sees little to no compliance on ground. And I would like to know from you, how does the law, as a medical practitioner, how does the law sometimes fall short? Because the medical community is also governed by certain professional guidelines and codes of conduct. So how does the law fall short as an instrument of reform? And what are some other ways that the state can bring about reform that actually click on ground with the medical community?
Hi. To answer your question, Kartavi, I'm going to go back to 2002 when I was a first year medical student in Calcutta National Medical College. Okay? When we studied the human anatomy, we were taught there's a male anatomy, we were taught there's a female anatomy. Very rarely were we thoroughly taught that there's an intersex anatomy. Practically, I don't think so. We were shown an intersex patient back in the day. Yeah. As we progressed with our medical course, we studied multiple subjects like surgery, gynecology, pediatrics. Never in any of those subjects did I notice that there was a separate section focusing on the LGBTQ community or their issues. Okay. As we progress towards our internship, I at least have never been placed in a ward back in the day which actually had transgender patients. And when it came to HIV positive patients, the general consensus was they are untouchables. That's what we've learned, you know. Now, to answer your question again here, how do you expect a generation of doctors like me who have studied throughout these years, and it has been ingrained in our formative years that health is majorly heteronormative and anything else is an abomination, right? So the laws have always existed. It's the implementation of the laws with sensitivity is what is thoroughly lacking in our country. Okay? There should be significant implementations of these laws, not just in the grassroots levels, but also in the senior most levels. So when it comes to the grassroots levels, I'm talking about changing the medical curriculum, number one. Number two, I want the young doctors, interns, medical staff, house staff, nurses, all of them to be sensitized during the formative years. Apart from that, it's the senior most doctors who also need sensitization. We've made such amazing progress in the field of HIV. Living with HIV is not a death sentence anymore. But unfortunately, a majority of doctors, and I'm talking about the senior most doctors in some of the best private institutions in our city, who are not even aware that living with HIV is actually now easier than living with diabetes. You know? It's been very unfortunate, but a lot of my patients who had come in from senior doctors from other hospitals traumatized because some of the doctors have actually told them that living with HIV makes you dirty, or the fact that syphilis is apparently the punishment you get for having same sex relationships. So unless you change their mindset, I will not be able to blame the senior group of doctors because that is what they've been taught for so many years. And unfortunately, I don't see much being done in changing their mindset. You know, so I personally feel it is very, very crucial to implement sensitivity and implement training programs in every step of the field of medicine, particularly when it comes to the young doctors as well as the senior most doctors. Because if I do not know how to treat this community, how will I actually honor the laws that govern it? That's what I want to say as a
A lot of times when legal reform is being proposed or some sort of policy changes are being proposed, we it can end up being it can end up being very divorced from the ground reality, where when there's such a huge information gap or such a huge awareness gap, then mandating something in the law sometimes won't end up having any impact. I want to come to Soham next. I think Koyel, for example, spoke at length about some sources of violence against queer persons, and it's something that came up in the previous chat as well. But what I wanted to ask you was that how do we understand the situation today when it comes to violence against queer persons, and what are some forms of violence that specifically remain invisible or underreported? And following from that, what I also would like you to speak about maybe is the legal remedies that remain available to queer trans persons, especially considering that the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita has come into force last year. So, what are the kind of legal remedies available now? Where can queer persons go when subjected to violence? And what sort of legal and institutional changes do you think need to be made so that this access becomes more is facilitated and becomes more easily available?
Uh, Hello everyone, I'm Soham. I think I'll just start with a little tale, a common tale that we experience in our lives. So this is more like a case study that I came through. So this talks about a person called X, and while growing up in class 8, X realized that they feel different. They are attracted to the same gender and they got confused. Now, the point is, when this person was growing up, they had nowhere to fall on, there was no internet as such. So, there was hardly any information about being attracted to the same gender when everyone in their classroom were attracted to the opposite. the opposite gender. Because also we need to understand that at that point of time, sex meant gender and gender meant sex. So what they did was they came out to their sister. They told them that I think I'm attracted to a man. And then the first thing that the sister said was, okay, give me 5 minutes. I'll get back to you with an answer. The sister took 5 minutes, came back, and said, this is wrong. You cannot do anything related to this. You cannot fall in love with another man, being a boy. So that was done. The sister did her part, natal family did their part. And this child goes to school and starts talking to their best friend. And while talking to their best friend, they said that, I think I'm in love with a man. And the best friend was quite welcoming about it. She was like, okay, that happens. And then after a few days, the ex person, kind of realized that the story has went around like wildfire. Now everyone knows that this child is in love with another man, and the teachers are looking at him differently. His classmates are looking at him differently, and that is when things starts getting serious and the boy starts getting bullied. Different comments such as, you make me puke. These were the comments that used to come to him, and that went on for years. From school to college, it just went on, and there was no backing up from native family. Now, the point is, think about this person who's all alone in the world trying to understand his feelings. And when the state doesn't even recognize that a person who's under 18 can have sexual feelings. It's very weird for us to understand, I think, at times, that how we look at children. We do not look at our childhoods as if someday suddenly when we turned 18 we realize, okay, we are homosexuals, okay, I'm attracted to the same gender. It's just on your 18th birthday you realize, okay, I'm going to have sex with another man. It's quite fascinating how the entire legal system looks at children, and that is exactly where the problem starts, because we do not recognize that these children have sexual feelings too. These children have emotions too. So this is just a story that I wanted to start with uh, to kind of make an imprint that everything from starting of our life, as Dr. Chandra was saying, that when a person is born, that is where the problem starts. That is where the markers are given whether this person is a boy or a girl, and that shapes the entire lives. And that is exactly where the problem starts. That is exactly what happens throughout your life. Can be done for people like us. I think if we start talking about childhood, I think a lot of things need to be changed in POXO. That's the first step. And through POXO, I think the second thing that comes to my mind would be the entire idea of Sarva Siksha mission that is out there. There's a category called CWSN, Children with Special Needs. I hate the term, but that is not the problem. The problem is children with special needs do not take into account queer trans persons, but they need special extra guidance, extra care, because they are not growing up like any other kids, because they face more realities than what we can ever think of. So I think that is another section where we need to have better inputs. Um, of course, POXO training for teachers is very important. I was bullied in school in different ways by my teachers. So training of teachers, and I think the majority would agree that there's nothing better that we can think of right now other than sensitization. So various organizations throughout the country, they are working, they are sensitizing different sorts of people, starting from police uh, to teachers to everyone who has a direct link to queer trans lives. And I think the government needs to take some actions. The government needs to understand that, it's not always good to fall on NGOs to do all the work. It's also the onus of the government that they should take up responsibilities, that of course they should bring queer trans people, they should bring NGOs to the table when they're discussing about laws, when they're discussing anything related to queer trans people. So I think that's all for now.
Thank you so much for that, Soham. I know we're running a little behind time, not a little, I think significantly behind time, but a couple of just quick questions to the panelists. The first thing I want to ask, Ayushman, again coming back to you. You spoke about how there is a continuum of housing options that should be looked at when we're talking about issues that the community is facing and that any marginalized group is facing. But we do end up seeing that, despite that, a lot of options end up being crisis responses and emergency options when it comes to marginalized groups. So, in the context of the queer community, for example, Garima Grahs have been set up. Those Garima Grahs, whether or not they're operational, the kind of funding crunch they face, are a major issue, of course, altogether. But at the same time, they also have, as people have pointed out, a 1 year stay limit. They don't function as actual housing options because you can't come there with your family. It's very individual based. So what I wanted you to briefly speak about is what are some of the other, how should housing be imagined for marginalized groups so that it doesn't just focus on this kind of crisis intervention, and what are some of the other options that should be looked at?
Absolutely. Also taking from Soham's point of how it's not just the NGO's responsibility to. So the Garima Grass currently they're all fully dependent on the NGO partner, and they are the ones who have to look for a building. They are the ones who have to pay the landlords and everything. Compare this to the other schemes that are there for homeless persons, and there it's the government which gives the building and the shelter, and they don't have to pay the rent. It's just that they have to operate and manage the shelter. So that is one big challenge that exists in Garima Grass scheme, and that's why maybe more NGOs don't come forward to open such Garima Grass, and they don't participate in the nomination process. But yes, coming to the continuum of housing options, it has to be seen at what stages does an individual need housing, and crisis centers and emergency housing is the only option. It's the most easiest thing to do is to designate a building and say, okay, you can come and live here for some time, and that's it. But to provide housing to people, low cost affordable housing to people which is free from discrimination, that requires a lot more effort in terms of planning the scheme and actually implementing it. There's actually also a housing shortage, as I'm saying, in the cities, the population is supposed to be India is going to be the largest urban population in a few years, and what are we going to do then? We as people who are coming from privilege in the queer community, we still face difficulty to find housing. And even if you're not from the queer community, you face difficulty in finding a house in Delhi which is affordable, which is in an area which is near to your work. That's already difficult. So we have to think of it comprehensively, reimagine what housing looks like for queer persons. As Koyel also pointed out, the Garima Crest do not allow queer relationships. You can't bring your partner there. Yet we have seen cases where people, trans men and trans women living in the Garima Greh, they have found relationship. They've come into a relationship together. They found love. but then they had to move out of the Garima because they started that relationship. Also, when do you realize you're trans? It's not just like, again, a button that it's not on your 18th birthday that somebody comes to tell you you're a wizard. Okay, it happens like, over time you realize your queerness, your transness. And so for younger people who are not even sure if they are trans, how do they access such shelter homes? Because if you can't state that you're trans, if you just know that, okay, you're different, like a lot of the people that we spoke to in the Garimakras themselves, they realize they are trans after meeting the individuals who are living there. So these are the lived, again, realities of queer people that we have to understand. Nobody suddenly just like gets to know that, okay, you're queer or trans. It's a gradual process. Once you see people like you, once you see what is possible in terms of, your gender fulfillment, only then you understand your transness or queerness. So those things have to be taken into account. The Nalsa judgment does not mention housing like at all in a proper or a meaningful way. The Trans Persons Act mentions the right to residence, but again, that right to residence is in context of natal families. And of course, natal families are a source of violence, it's a site of violence. We have heard like horrendous tales of how they have been evicted from their houses, and when they've gone back to retrieve their identity documents, they have been threatened, and those documents have been burned by the family members, because it's either like you come and live here on our terms, or you don't get access to any of this thing, not neither your inheritance, neither your own identity documents, your birth certificates, etc. So that is a big challenge which needs to be addressed. But what about the right to resident outside of the natal family? What happens when you leave the natal family and go to a city? What are the options that are there available to you there? Are there hostels for LGBTQ persons who are working maybe and who can maybe pay a small fee to live there? Are there like, low cost affordable housing options available in the city? Can the government provide some sort of rent subsidies to people? Because these are all models that have been experimented with across the world, and they are working in many places, but we just have to think about it. The transgender protection rules, the rules with the act, they mention a list of like short stay homes and shelter homes that need to be established, but there was a time frame of 2 years, and that time frame has like already like passed, but we don't have anything concrete yet. So we really need to have like a discussion like we've had, over the months with Vidhi and KSF, to understand what exactly are the housing needs of the community. Also, what happens to ownership of housing? Because housing ownership is it's a big important step in people's lives. What about the access to land? There are states like Madhya Pradesh and I think Odisha which have talked about the inclusion of transgender persons in homestead land, access to that. But then again, that is something which is not implemented very well. In Tamil Nadu, we had the scheme which was implemented by Grace, which was the livelihood come housing scheme, where you live in that area and you also have an occupation and a job, and you create that community of your own. That is something that needs to be studied, but also we need to think about, we don't want to ghettoize queer people also in different parts of city to the outskirts. How do we avoid that as well? So all these questions need to be really thought of, and then a policy or a scheme needs to be made. Just to tick the box, just to say that okay, trans persons should be prioritized in a particular scheme is not enough, because that really does not lead to any real solutions for queer people.
Yeah, we definitely need to expand our imagination a little bit beyond Garima Grace. But I'll take it back to Dr. Chandra and healthcare generally. There can be an n number of provisions around access to healthcare and generally access to healthcare, but without access to insurance or good insurance, it becomes very difficult to access good healthcare services in the system the way it is. And like I'm sure a lot of us have had the kind of David versus Goliath experience that claiming an insurance is or accessing insurance is. And we have an IRDAI circular which expressly prohibits discrimination or denying insurance just based on a person's HIV status. But again, it sees very little implementation. So, what I would like to know is what can the state do to actively disincentivize some insurance companies from denying healthcare or denying insurance based on a person's HIV status, just based on a person's HIV status?
educate them and sensitize them. But on paper and by law, in fact, a majority of insurance companies in India are to cover HIV positive patients. If you look at HDFC Ergo, if you look at ICICI Lombard, quite a couple of insurance companies on paper clearly mention that if you live with HIV, you are covered for it. Okay? Again, everything changes when the implementation comes in. Let's say you're admitted in a hospital and you're about to be discharged, and suddenly there is a clause that you're HIV positive. They usually figure out a way to just ensure that you do not get that coverage. As sad as it sounds, but the majority of hospitals do follow this. Again, due to the lack of information and the lack of education. A majority of folks aren't aware that your current HIV medications literally make the virus undetectable in your body. When you're HIV undetectable, you are HIV untransmissible. You cannot transmit the virus to another person, even if you have unprotected intercourse. And that actually makes it easier for even a straight person to marry a woman who's negative and vice versa. And you can have children who are negative if you know how to take the current medication and you have the current guidance. If this information unfortunately is not known by a majority of the medical community as well as a majority of the insurance companies that we just spoke about. Again, I'm also going to talk about a bit in terms of preventive measures. A lot of insurance companies, again, are not even aware that there are medications to prevent HIV. And I'm going to bring in this concept of PEP and PrEP, which you might be aware of. Okay? How many of you in this room have actually seen an advertisement anywhere in our country actively promoting PrEP and PEP? Anybody in this room, have you actually seen it anywhere? People are not even aware of the fact that there are simple pills to take that are not very expensive. If you take a pill a day for 28 days after exposure, within 72 hours, you will not get the virus. And if you're on PrEP, if you are somebody who is into risky sex and in any way exposed to the virus, you can be on PrEP and not get the virus. That actually brings down your health costs even further. If you don't have the virus, the costs considerably come down. Unfortunately, our government is also not aware of this, or even if they're aware, they do not want to discuss it. I've been told by some of the pharma companies, I don't know if they're here or not, but I'd ask them clearly that why don't you promote the use of PrEP and PEP? It's good for you, you'll make money. Apparently, the government thinks that promoting PrEP and PEP promotes promiscuity. I mean, have you seen our population? I mean, we invented the Kama Sutra. Clearly, promiscuity is not our problem. Okay? Unfortunately, we could have done a lot. A lot of lives could be saved had we used our medications properly, and it's easy to get, it's easy to access, and it's available at every pharmacy if we don't talk about this. And the insurance companies should also be aware of the concept of the availability of PEP and PrEP so that at least they can cover it so that you do not have to cover the complications of HIV in the future. You know? Unfortunately, again, sensitivity, lack of knowledge, lack of education. I spoke to a couple of senior doctors, some of my mentors who've taught me, and I've done the whole rigmarole. I practiced in Safdarjung as a junior doctor, I went in AIMS as a senior resident, I've done the whole rigmarole. And some of my senior doctors that I spoke to, who are stalwarts of the medical community, I asked them, are you aware of something called doxy-PEP? Is anybody in the audience aware of doxy-PEP, apart from my LGBTQ friends, of course? But there are medications available. It's as simple as 2 tablets to take, and you actually can prevent the spread of syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea. All I elicited was a loud when I spoke to them about doxy-PEP. Okay? Unfortunately, again, the lack of education is significant. I'll suggest when it comes to our insurance companies as well as our government, educate, sensitize. That's all I can say in this case.
I just wanted to add something. So, the only space where I have seen advertisements of PrEP was Grinder. So, use Grinder. Very important.
We need to thank our community for that. We are doing our bit.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. I think it took 10 minutes for you to introduce people, some people in the room definitely to this. So it's not going to take all that effort for the government also to, put this information out. It doesn't take that much time. It's about doing some sensitization and prioritizing some things. My final question, and I want to pose a common question to both Koyal and Soham here. You have also spoken about how law reform takes time, and I think all of us are also very aware of that. That changing our law sometimes is not so easy. But at the same time, apart from some very macro level changes to the law, even when those laws exist, the systems that you interact with are very hostile to the queer community. Even in terms of violence, people can't approach the systems that are meant to protect them, like the police, because the police itself is hostile. And the police, a lot of times, the government and the state, a lot of times, are the very sites of violence. Just like the natal family, which is supposed to protect you, the state doesn't protect one either. So over there, apart from just changing our laws, what do you think are some of the first steps that should be taken? For example, when it comes to the way the police operates, or even when it comes to other systems, like when you go to a hospital and the way they receive complaints from a queer patient, or a queer survivor of violence when you're supposed to get examined. So what are some of those changes? And I think, Koyal, for example, the episode with Sappho earlier this year that many people in the room may already know about, and the amount of challenges that you had to face in being heard by the police. And then there are counter FIRs, for example, that have been filed. So what are some of those things, like for example, in terms of sensitization, in terms of the way the system needs to work with the community, etc.? So just your thoughts on that.
I think most of our interactions with the police has been very dramatic. We can make a film out of it. But the problem that happens is, if there is a change in the service rule that the police has, and negligence to take FIRs lodged by queer and trans people can lead to penalty, and it should be looked at as misconduct. I honestly feel that is the only way that police can be taken. The police and the authorities have to be taken into accountability. So the senior officials know because they are part of the sensitization programs that organizations do. But it is with the ground level staff who we are interacting on everyday basis. They are the ones who just blow us away. There have been times when an FIR has been lodged by us against the perpetrators, and our intent was not to reprimand or create some instance out of it. We also wanted to talk about how trans individuals, queer individuals, are subjected to public space violence. And because of the Naya Sandhita's new law, they have now launched a counter FIR against me. So, as an organizational head who has FCRA, you cannot go ahead with the FIR. You have to drop down the charges to save the organization, and which means you have to get into an amicable settlement. So our hands are tied in both ways. This counter FIR and this FIR is now becoming such a big issue that and the person who was subjected to this violence in the initial part, he is going to undergo surgery. So for him, if he has to go through surgery and he wants to get a job somewhere else, he will not be able to do so with an FIR in his name. No organization will take a person, an employee, who has an FIR in their name. So that kind of takes away all his ability to do, things. With I always say that it is not just dignity in life, but dignity in death. 3 years back, during the peak hours of COVID, I know somebody who's a lesbian person, and she did not eat for 25 days. And she'd written in the cupboard that I do not want to live because my life and death will never be understood. When we finally could take her to the hospital and she was admitted, she died in the hospital when she was force fed. And then her brother comes in and tells us, her final rites should be done in clothes that we decide for her. And she was a mask person, she was a trans mask person also. So, not just dignity in life, but also dignity in death. To be the right to be remembered after death, the right to go in clothes I've chosen to wear all my life. the right to be acknowledged and seen how I, as a queer trans person, want to be seen, the right to hand over my body. There was a case in Kerala where a gay couple who had lived for 10 years and their partner was not given the right to perform their last rites. They were actually, they were made to stand 100 meters away from the place where the cremation was happening and just witness the cremation happening while the natal family took up all the responsibilities. So, I know it gets a little cynical when I start with the medical fraternity. My only complaint, my only anger, my only fact is that they dehumanize a person. They do not look at us with flesh and blood and emotions and bodies. I know a trans woman now in a hospital who does not want to get surgery because she does not want to be admitted in a male ward. That is why she's been delaying her surgery for the longest time. Her surgery, which is needed for her gallbladder, for her appendix, she's not doing it. And the only reason is she knows that okay, her documents have not changed, so she will be admitted in a male ward, and that is something she wants to stop. So she's not getting the surgery that's needed to save her life, and her gallbladder has now burst. So the situation has gotten all the more bad. The point is, there needs to be collective actions from the community, but the onus cannot just be on us. It cannot be just on the community to do things for ourselves. We have done our bit, we are doing our bit, we are living these lives. But we need sensitization, we need implementation of the law, and not just in paper, but in we have to hold people accountable. It is about time to hold people accountable if they fail to do their responsibilities. Until and unless that happens, the situation is not going to change. These are some instances of violence. I can go on and depress you for the rest of the session, so I'm just going to stop here. Thank you.
Uh, Continuing where Koyel left, I think the onus is not only on us, and the decision making power is not only with the heterosexual people. It's a two-way journey that we need to realize. So I was just trying to write a paper. It has been more than 6 years post decriminalization of 377, and while writing that paper, I kind of realized I took a few pointers which I think would help us to, you know, which help us to understand that nothing has changed over these years. Uh, and more than that, how this entire state machineries work against queer and trans people. So this is one of the oldest newspaper articles that I could find. By 1918, police found, this is 1918. By 1918, police found the body of a teenage member of the Dhaka Anushilan Samiti. Investigation suggested he was murdered to silence allegations of sexual abuse by a senior revolutionary leader. The police used the case to malign native revolutionaries, framing it as a scandal. Yet the core issue, pedophilia and sexual violence, were ignored. Under the grip of Victorian morality and colonial laws like Section 377, Indian society had no space to acknowledge or to discuss such an abuse. This was one of the oldest things that I could find. And there are, of course, other instances. These are from 2014 onwards until 2018. Kochi police brutally attacks transgender people. These are all headlines. 4 in 10 trans people in India subjected to violence before they reach 18. Transgender teenager immolates self after police sexual abuse in Chennai. Trans community assaulted police demand flash privates. Police warden accused of raping transgender person inmate in Tiruchi jail. These are just from 2014 to 2000, right before the decriminalization. And these are the headlines after 2018. On May 16th, near Damdam Cantonment Station Road, early morning, workers spotted a jute sack and informed the nearby police. Upon opening it, the police recovered the half burnt dead body of a trans person. It was a murder. In 2019, a trans person was beaten to death in Nagarakatta, Jalpaiguri district on suspicion of being a child abductor. A trans person found dead in a flat, no police investigations happened. So these are rampant headlines we see every day in different parts of the country. So, right before ending, I think I would like to end my part with a question. Uh, this is for all of us to question, for even for the state to an extent. So we have seen what has happened in 2009, where uh, our hopes were high. Then in 2011, we were again criminalized. Then 2018 happened, 2019 trans bill, and so on and so forth. We look at America, we see how the present administration is pulling off everything that queer and trans people have, more so with trans people. Now, the question is, how long are we going to fight like this? How long are we going to be in that dilemma of whether we are criminals or not? Whether one fine day someone suddenly wakes up and decides that we are criminals, and on the other day they decide that, oh no, they are not criminals. So, this is something for all of us to question, that how long. But then again, someone had said that, we breed in ghettos, we breed in slums, we breed in cities, and we live. We never lose hope, we carry hope, and we live. We will keep on giving. Thank you.